Leveling up your combat phase. The most important overall phase in Magic. This is how a lot of games are won and lost.
Like, we're going to cover some real nitty-gritty rules that I learned as we were making this episode. Yeah. So we'll make you a better player. Is it time? It's time.
We've been putting it off for so long, but now we're going to talk about the one, the only.
This episode is brought to you by Liquid IV. Want to stay hydrated this summer? Liquid IV has you covered with 3 times the electrolytes of leading sports drinks and 8 vitamins and nutrients. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code COMMAND at checkout. Liquid IV. Tear, pour, live more.
Greetings, humans. You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Command Zone podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Weeks.
Hello, and it's me, Murph. We are here to talk about an excellent topic today, aren't we, Rachel?
Yeah. Fighting.
Boom, 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 boom.
War.
Combats.
Yeah. Specifically the combat phase. We're going to break down the steps in the combat phase. We're going to talk about how different keywords work together. We're going to talk about some nitty-gritty rule stuff that occurs when creatures go to combat or blocking and all the stuff that happens in that phase. We're even going to talk about some cool tips and tricks to make sure that you are getting the full benefit out of your combat step. We're hopefully going to make you a better player, but mostly a better attacker or blocker, I suppose.
Yep. You need to be doing both of those probably in every single game of Magic you're ever in. So this is lots of good information. Unless you're Josh, in which case you just sit there and draw cards. No, he's always just like, I like my cards. I'm going to take 10. Like, all right, Josh, all right. You do you.
Maybe he doesn't know how to use the combat step.
Probably not.
Maybe he should watch this episode.
Josh, you should watch this episode along with all of our lovely listeners out there.
We're going to talk about lots of cards and how they interact together. If you want to pick up any of the cards that we talk about, or if you're like, I've been building all wrong, I need to get this card, go to cardkingdom.com/command. Card Kingdom has a huge selection of Magic singles and sealed product. If you're building, it's a great place to pick up a huge amount of cards all in one place because they have an enormous inventory. Especially when it comes to new products, there's so many different versions of cards that if you're not cracking a ton of sealed product, which hopefully you're not, you can get exactly the cards that you're looking for just by going online and clicking on the ones and buying them. And they all show up safely on your doorstep in one safe package. I love shopping at Card Kingdom because I know the cards that I order on the website are the ones that are going to arrive on my doorstep in the condition that I ordered them in. I know they're going to come safely in a little case with a little packing peanut and maybe even a little token or a sticker, a treat from Card Kingdom. I like shopping there because I know exactly what I'm going to get, and I don't like keeping track of 1,000 envelopes moving through the mail. So you can support the show and pick up some sweet Magic cards over at cardkingdom.com/command.
And speaking of trying to keep your cards safe, ULTRAPRO.com/command is the best place to go to get everything you could ever want or need for playing games of Magic the Gathering. You got sleeves, you got dice, you got deck boxes, you got playmats, you got wall scrolls, you got all kinds of things you didn't even know existed. But if you go to ultrapro.com/command, you can go browse, scroll through the website. They have flash deals on there all the time. And they even have stuff that's up to like 20, 30, 40% off sometimes. Just click around, see what you like, or you can buy Ultra Pro products at your local game store. Any way that you do it, you're supporting the Command Zone, you're supporting the show, and you're keeping your cards nice and protected.
Yeah, check out their fancy new Apex sleeves. They're really sweet, they shuffle really well, and they're releasing them for each set. So there's like new art coming out all the time on Apex sleeves. Check those out as well. Again, ultrapro.com/command. The final way to support us is directly over at patreon.com/commandzone. Our patrons get access to a variety of benefits, including access to game nights and extra turns a day early without ads. Nice.
If you really want to skip the ads, which are
uninterrupted gameplay drama.
But ads are so funny. Every time I put the ads in for the final version, I'm like, man, patrons are missing out on this excellent quality stuff. But you do get it a day early without ads.
Plus exclusive content at certain tiers. You get access to turn talks, Turn Talk, One Talk.
We go back and forth. We'll call it Turn Talks. We'll call it Turn Talk.
Yeah, it's a conversation that we have after every single episode of Extra Turns to talk about how the game went, what would have happened if we had one more turn, what was in our hand. It's just a sort of a frank discussion of how your deck performed and what, like, if you're going to make any changes to the deck after this. It's a ton of fun. It's all the people that you just saw talking cards, which is my favorite thing. Again, patreon.com/commandzone. Plus, we shout out one lucky patron every single podcast episode, and this one is dedicated to Hendrik de Leon.
De Leon. Hendrik.
You rock.
You rock. Thanks so much.
Thanks for supporting the show.
All right, here we are. Main topic.
Yeah.
Leveling up your combat phase. So, like we kind of touched on a little bit beforehand, combat is probably the most important overall phase in Magic. Because
it's certainly the most complicated.
It's definitely the most complicated, but this is also how a lot of games are won and or lost. Combat is usually how you win games. In games of Commander, not every single deck uses that as their primary win condition, but it's always going to be something that you're going to be running up against, whether you're an attacker or a blocker. So it is very, very important to know the little details and nuances of the attack phase.
And honestly, like, we're going to cover some pretty basic stuff today. We're also going to cover some real nitty-gritty rules that I learned as we were making this episode.
Yeah.
So if you're a more experienced Magic player, there's still little things that you can learn in the rules that will make certain scenarios, will make you a better player. And we'll talk about how you can use those things those rules to make yourself a better player and find cool lines in your next Commander game. Something that we talked about going into this is the difference between steps and phases.
Yeah.
Originally, this was called Level Up Your Combat Step, and then we realized that combat itself is actually a phase. There's like the beginning phase, that's your untap, upkeep, draw.
Yep.
And then there's main one, and then main phase one, and then there's the combat phase, which is broken up into a series of steps.
Yep. Just like your beginning phase is broken up into a series of steps, which is untap, upkeep, draw.
Yeah.
Similarly, combat has its own individual steps.
Yeah, and we call it the combat step so often, but it makes sense. Steps are the little ones.
Yep.
You take little steps to
Phase
go
is
on
the big one.
To go on a big walk or a phase. So we're talking generally about the combat phase, but right now we're going to break down specifically the combat steps, and there are a lot of them. I think Commander players have a habit of really rushing through the combat phase.
Yeah.
Being like, I go to attacks, I attack you with this and you with that and you with that, and then we go to damage. But there's so many little moments where you have to interact before one thing happens. You have to make blocks before this. You even get priority to do this. And knowing when to break down really complicated combats can make resolving things easier, can make like tricks work better. Or interaction work better. Knowing when you can use it is really important. So if you're in like an alpha attack, I would recommend that Commander players slow everything down.
Yes.
If you're making a little like value attack or something, then maybe you can move through it quickly. But if you're going to try and kill the table, go through every single one of these steps to make sure everybody has the opportunity to interact and you're making the right choices at the right time.
Yeah. So what are all of these different steps? There's beginning of combats, attackers, declare blockers, combat damage, and end of combat. So those are the 5. We're going to go through them one by one. Now keep in mind, just like basically every step or phase in the game, mana pools empty in between each of these. So whenever you do an action, you got to tap your mana. You can't have floating mana just exist in between any of these steps. Sorry, it'll disappear once we move on to the next one. So just keep that in mind.
Doesn't travel over phases, travels over steps, or
empties.
Empties over steps. All right, so the first step here is beginning of combat. So this is as soon as you get into this, the very first thing that happens in the combat phase. At the beginning of combat triggers, go on the stack.
Exactly. And so you have things like the Ozolith or Loyal Apprentice, where they'll say, at the beginning of combat, do thing X.
Yeah. And it's that simple. There's nothing that goes on the stack before this. There's no moment to interact in combat before these things happen.
Yes.
If you make it to their combat, the Ozolith trigger goes on the stack. So if you want to blow up the Ozolith, do so in the main phase before that.
Yeah. So that's one thing that I've seen a lot of people kind of be pretty unclear about. And I've seen comments on like Game Night's videos about this type of thing, where what's the difference between beginning of combat and before that. Anything before that is your first main phase. So if you try to do something before the beginning of combat, you have not changed phases, and whoever has priority, whoever's turn it is, they're still in their first main phase and can do any first main phase actions, like play a land, cast a sorcery, cast a creature, whatever it might be.
I think a common confusion for Commander players is if they want to take an action that affects combat, when to do it.
Yes.
And it's something that's come up in our games before when it's, a lot of people will say, before you go to combat, I want to take an action. So before you go to combat, I'm going to remove your Atali or something like that. And technically, if you say before you go to combat, you're doing that in main phase 1. So if you remove the Atali, even if they've already said, all right, I'm going to combat, if you say before you go to combat, then they have the opportunity to get priority again in their main phase and cast other things. So cast a creature with haste, or cast an equipment, or any other like sorcery speed type stuff. So it's better to say at the beginning of combat, I remove your Atali.
Yes.
Because Atali hasn't attacked yet, so attack triggers haven't gone on the stack, and they don't get the opportunity to unwind and go and back to their main phase and start casting more sorcery speed stuff.
Yeah, I literally had this problem at pre-release for Thunder Junction. I was playing against Manson, and he was playing something, and I said, all right, before combat, I'm going to remove one of your things. And he said, oh, before combat? And I thought about it, and I was like, well, he definitely has something, but I said what I said, before combat, and then he's like, all right, Calamity, the one that has haste and can make token copies of things, and just completely wrecked my day with it. So those very like small distinctions very much do matter. Yeah.
I think this is interesting because if you say like before you go to combat, means something totally different than before you declare attackers or at the beginning of your combat. So if you want to do something before attackers are declared, but you don't want to give them priority again in their main phase, do it in the beginning of combat phase. Of course, if you need to remove a beginning of combat trigger, you have to do it in the main phase, like a Loyal Apprentice or the Oceleth.
Yeah. So that's beginning of combat. One more thing to note is that for basically all of these individual steps, whenever you move to the next one, the very first thing that's going to happen is always the thing that the step is based around. So beginning of combat, all of those beginning of combat triggers will go on the stack. That's going to be the very first thing that happens before anybody can respond. Same thing once we move on to declare attackers. The very first thing that's going to happen before anybody can respond is attackers are declared all at once. Whoever is doing the attacking can choose, I'm going to attack this at you, this at you, this at you. That happens all at once at the beginning of declare attackers step.
One more thing you can do in the beginning of combat, you can also crew vehicles in this step if you want to attack with them. You may not, however, saddle mounts because that's only at sorcery speed.
Only as a sorcery.
So if there's some sort of reason where there's like mana floating in the main phase and you don't want to make your vehicle a creature while there's mana floating.
Yeah, in case your opponent has.
Your opponent has floating mana is what I mean. You can go to combat, crew it, and then the mana pool will have emptied.
For sure.
All right, the next step of the combat phase
we have to be so like very specific about it because I want to say phase every time.
Every single time is declare attackers. So like Murph said, the very first thing that happens is the active player declares attackers. All of them, where they're going, all at the same time. And no one gets priority in this moment. Not the active player, not any of the other players. You immediately declare attackers. That has to happen before anybody gets priority in this step.
Yeah, this is where you'll also pay for things like Ghostly Prison type of effects. You'll do this when you are declaring the attacks.
Yeah, it's sort of... Ghostly Prison is so strange.
So weird.
So the first thing that happens is you declare attacks, and then those creatures are attacking. It's where they are attacking, which means that whenever creature attacks, triggers are now on the stack.
Yeah.
So that's the Atali that we mentioned before. That's like a sort of the Animist type of thing. All of those triggers go on the stack at the same time. That's the first time that players get priority in this step.
Yep. Once anything has said, whenever thing blank attacks, now all the stuff is attacked, all those triggers are on the stack, then you can pass priority around and do all that before moving on to the next step.
You mentioned Ghostly Prison because I think that's really interesting. Yep. Ghostly Prison isn't technically a trigger.
Yeah.
It says creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature they control that's attacking you.
We broke this down a little bit and we're like, that wording makes absolutely no freaking sense.
Based on how the card actually works.
It says creatures can't attack, so they can't attack unless they pay 2 for each that's attacking you. But you just said that creatures can't attack you.
So how are they attacking?
So technically it's broken up into a bunch of like little sub-steps.
Yeah, and I want to talk about it because it's so relevant for Commander players. So in the declare attacker step, if a player has a Ghostly Prison and you want to attack them, you declare the attackers at them.
Yes.
And then Ghostly Prison says, hey, now you have to pay 2 to be doing this. And you either pay the 2 to do it, or you don't pay the 2 and the game unwinds back to the beginning of the declare attacker step and says, you can't attack. You're like, I just did, though. So there's really strange things that happen with Ghostly Prison where you could attack a player with a Ghostly Prison with like a Vigilant Mana Dork.
Like
with like
Faber or Elder or something like that. Yeah.
You could attack them with a Vigilant Mana Dork and then when asked to pay the tax for Ghostly Prison, can tap that creature that's attacking to pay for its own tax.
Yep. But once again, this is all mana abilities and things in the middle. These are all sub-steps in the attacker phase, so no priority goes around to anybody.
Really, really strange. And then, you will be actually attacking the player with the Ghostly Prison.
Super funky.
It is really strange. And I wanted to talk about this because there was a lot of questions online about it.
Oh, yeah.
With attack triggers, they're all going to go on the stack at the same time, and you can resolve them in any number, any order you'd like, as long as all the targets get named at the same time. So there's a lot of questions about the new Sentinel Sarah Lions, which is the Fallout card. It says, whenever Sentinel Sarah Lions and at least 2 other creatures attack, Sentinel Sarah Lions deals damage equal to the number of artifacts you control to target player. So if this goes on the stack, you name a target.
Yes.
But if you have some sort of ability that makes artifacts at the same time, like an Anim Pakal Thousand Moon, for example.
Which is also an attack trigger.
It's an attack trigger. It says whenever you attack with 1 or more non-gnome creatures, you put counters on Anim Pakal and make that many gnome artifact creature tokens. Both of those go on the stack at the same time. You can have the Anim Pakal trigger resolve first, make a bunch of gnomes, and then resolve the Sentinel Sarah Lions trigger. You just have to name the target as they go on.
That's the only thing that you have to do first, but... yeah, it'll work how you want it to.
Yes.
Is the TLDR.
They go on the stack at the same time. You can stack them, but you have to name all the targets that go on the stack at the same time. Yeah.
One other thing to note about the attacking step is that if anything puts things into play tapped and attacking, this will oftentimes happen in this step. They will not get any attack triggers or anything like that. They are just in, tapped, and attacking.
Because they weren't declared as attackers.
Yeah.
They didn't do the action of attacking.
They just already are.
Yeah. Like an Ilharg the Raised Boar, when it attacks, you put a creature into play attacking.
Yeah.
That creature didn't attack, Ilharg attacked. So there's no moment for its attack trigger to go on the stack. This is often a question that happens with Myriad.
Yes.
People ask if they get the attack trigger on the tokens made with Myriad, and that is not the case. They enter attacking.
Yeah. One other thing about this before we move on to declare blockers, this is the point in time where you will flash in blockers. If you ever want to block, this is the last point that you possibly can, and probably strategically the best point for you to do it.
Yeah, this is the moment where you flash in a blocker, where you crew a vehicle that's going to block. As soon as you go to the blocker step, we're declaring blockers right away. So you have to make the creature a legal blocker before going to the declare blockers step. And I know a lot of this sounds really, really finicky. I get it.
Because technically it is.
It is. But it's in Commander, things are like, they're so complicated. And if you can slow down game actions to the point where everybody understands where we are and can think through what's happening, then it's really helpful in really critical points. I've had so many attacks that like alpha strikes that get muddled because one player goes to damage before another player goes to damage. And they're like somebody will take the damage before blocks happen because they have no blockers. And the blocking player is like, no, I have interaction. before anybody takes any damage.
And that changes the math on things. And so you just kind of have to like back up, rewind. So just try to be as clear as possible.
Yeah. Okay. So those are all the things that you do in the attacker's step. You resolve all those attack triggers. All of the creatures are now attacking. Attacks are locked in, and the blockers are ready.
Yeah. So next, you go to declare blockers. Again, this is the first thing that happens. So all attacks are locked in. Attacks can no longer be changed. Well, they couldn't be changed beforehand. They were all declared.
Yeah.
But they're completely locked in. So now all defending players assign blocks in active player, non-active player order. Now, this is something that we covered in some past episodes.
Yeah, it was in specifically. There's two. There's one about priority and the power of the stack.
Yep.
And then there is, we referred to it again in 521, which is rules Magic players keep getting wrong. So if you want to learn more about AppNap, which you really, really should, it's so important in multiplayer rules, go check out those episodes.
But for the sake of this, it's just clockwise turn order is how you do blocks in a multiplayer game. So that's another thing. I've seen people block out of order, and that could change things.
Yeah, I think if you know how somebody else is blocking, you know how much damage they're taking, it changes what creatures you want to save. Maybe they took more damage than you thought they were going to take. So actually, I'm going to take the damage and try and kill them with my creatures rather than blocking to conserve my life total. So blocking in order does actually change decisions, which is interesting.
The more information you have, the more likely you are to make a more informed decision. So yeah, you block, and then this is where whenever blocks triggers happen, so something like Smuggler's Copter or Elder Gargaroth, pretty much exactly the same as whenever a thing attacks.
Yep.
It's just that, but for blocks. Pretty easy, pretty simple.
This is the first time anybody gets priority in the declare blocks step.
Yeah, so if you want to do any form of interaction before combat damage is dealt, people will often say before damage. Technically, they mean during the declare blockers step right here, right now, after blockers have been declared.
Yeah, this is the trixiest step usually because, again, you're acting as late as you can. You have the most information that you can. So now you can use your tricks as powerfully as possible. So this is where you would use like a berserk, like a pump spell, or you'd use a removal spell to remove an attacking creature or even a blocking creature. This is how you muddle things up before damage happens. This is also where creatures are considered unblocked.
Yeah.
For the sake of effects like ninjutsu, and there's even some cards that care about if this creature is attacking and is unblocked. But this is where ninjutsu becomes active. You can't, like, in the attacker's step, you can't activate ninjutsu, even though the creature isn't blocked yet, because it hasn't gained the quality of unblocked.
Yeah. It's a little funky, but again, Ninja is very popular, probably something you're going to run into at some point in your commander journey, so good stuff to know about.
All right. And finally...
Not finally. This is the second to last.
This is the second to last. Yeah. And, well, I was going to say, like, and importantly...
yes.
We move to damage. So this is the combat damage step is after that. Everybody's attacked, everybody's blocked, everybody's cast their tricks.
Yep, and then all of a sudden, damage all happens all at once. The only exception is if somebody double blocks, in which case you then need to assign blockers. Not assign blockers. You need to assign how combat damage is dealt.
Yeah, well, you need to...
Order block.
Order block.
Order damage. What's the exact term for that?
It's, I'm trying to think if you even order blockers here.
Yes, you must do it before damage is dealt.
Well, you do it before damage is dealt, but do you do it in declare blockers? Do you order the blockers, the attacker?
You do it in damage.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's why you're here. So, yeah, this is... Before damage is actually calculated, damage needs to be assigned.
Yes.
Is the big thing. So this is most relevant when a creature is double blocked or when a creature has trample, because it's the only time that you really have a lot of flexibility on how damage is assigned. Otherwise, one creature does all its damage to the other creature, which does all its damage to this original creature.
We'll get to trample a little bit later, but say you are attacking with a 4/4 and they double block with a 3/3 and a 2/3. You can assign it so that the 3/3 will take all the damage first, and then the 2/3 will only take one of the damage from the 4/4. So that one won't die, but you probably want the 3/3 dead regardless.
Probably. And it's worth noting that when you assign damage, you have to assign lethal to the first creature if you have it. Like if you have a 4/4 and you have a 3/3 and a 2/3, you couldn't deal like 2 damage to the 3/3 and 2 damage to the 2/3. Obviously, that's not very good for you, but you have to assign lethal damage if possible to the first creature.
Yeah, like say you had a Pyrohemia or something in play. And that is something that you might want to do. Get them all down to essentially 1 toughness, but you can't actually do that. So, sorry, tough. Must assign lethal damage.
I guess you could activate the Pyrohemia first and then assign 2 and 2, but that would be lethal damage. So
anyway, combat's confusing.
You get it. Yes, and then obviously, all creatures deal damage equal to their power to each other at the same time.
Yep. And then rinse and repeats. This is where all combat damage triggers will go on the stack. And once they're on the stack, this is the point where everybody can respond. Tell me if you've heard this song and dance before. It's pretty similar from step to step. So there's not too many things that are different about attackers, blockers, combat damage. Basically, all functions the same.
Yeah, so this is whenever your deal's combat damage triggers happen. This is Toski. This is Grim Hireling. They're very common in Commander. This is where they're going to happen. This all changes a little bit.
Yeah.
If there is...
I just read the notes. I'm like,
Yep.
oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
If there's a creature in combat with either first strike or double strike, not on the battlefield, if there is a creature that is either attacking or blocking that has either first strike or double strike.
It literally creates an extra, not full combat damage step, but a full combat damage step.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It creates it at the beginning of the combat damage step. So you go to the beginning of the combat damage step. It sees that there's a creature with first strike or double strike and creates an additional damage step.
Yeah.
And this is really important because there are certain creatures that are that have first strike that are designed to work with combat in a different way because they have first strike or double strike. Like a Drana Liberator of Malakir, which is flying and first strike, and it says whenever Drana deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. So Drana deals damage first, puts +1 counters on all of your attacking creatures, and then all of your creatures that don't have first or double strike will hit on the second combat damage.
And they'll hit harder because they're buffed now.
Because they're buffed.
So cool design, something very, very important to keep in mind.
There's even really wacky situations like Sidar Jabari of Zalfir. So this is the knight that has eminence, and it's a flying first striker that when it deals combat damage to a player, return target knight card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So there's certain knights that are extremely relevant if you reanimate before damage is dealt. One of them, notably, is Moonshaker Cavalry.
Yeah. Nuts card to reanimate, and then just have the rest of your guys just hit like trucks. Ooh.
But one that's really interesting is Quendi, Pride of Femeref. So this is a knight that has double strike, and it says creatures you control with first strike have double strike. So if you reanimate a Quendi on the first strike, it comes in, Sidar has first strike, and now is like, I have double strike.
That's crazy.
So
Dang.
suddenly he's hitting on the second strike also, even though he didn't have double strike when this combat began.
So funky.
It's
so funky.
It's so wild. But it's really, really important if you have a first striker that you do those things at the right time because it can change how you interact. If you have a first striker that draws a card, you're like, oh, I can draw a card and I can remove a creature?
Yeah, we actually got this wrong in the most recent Game Nights, the Thunder Junction one, where we were resolving a bunch of Ashland's combat damage triggers.
Yeah.
But one of them was a Glissa, which had first strike and death touch. So that should have resolved first.
Right.
But we didn't really think about it because she had like 4 different triggers on the stack, and we were just like, you can resolve them however you want, it's fine. And so she's like, all right, I'm going to resolve them like this. And we're like, sounds great.
All right, perfect.
And then we didn't catch it until much later. We're like, well, it's kind of is what it is. But
that's fine.
That is something that could potentially change the outcome of the game.
Yeah. And then, of course, state-based actions are checked. And all the creatures that took lethal damage go to the graveyard.
Kaput.
Well, Yeah, unless they have other keywords, which we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we'll get to those. We're just saying in general.
In general.
That's how I always explain Magic to people is you're like, all right, here's this. Here's the state of things. There's something that breaks literally every single one of these rules. We'll get to that when we get to that.
And it's for fun.
It's for fun.
So we've attacked, we've blocked, we've dealt damage. What else could there possibly be in the combat phase?
End of combat's damage, not end of combat damage, end of combat's step.
Yep.
So this is where everything is done. Creatures have gone to the graveyard, and there are surprisingly few cards that deal with this step. Usually it's done for like, not technically cleanup, but cleaning things up. Like exile this at the end of combat or something like that. If they make like tapped and attacking tokens.
Yeah.
There's like Delina.
Myriad you'll lose your creatures here. Delina, exile them, of course, at end of combat. It's mostly just to be like, combat is done. We're all good, right?
Yeah. There is a few weird interactions like with Desert.
Yeah. Desert specifies that it says Desert's a land that taps and says Desert deals 1 damage to target attacking creature. Activate only during the end of combat step.
So this is literally the only time when you can activate this ability, which is bizarre that they would put this on a card.
You can deal 1 damage to a creature that's already dealt damage.
But this was from, I'm pretty sure, Arabian Nights, and they were just kind of trying things.
Yeah,
so I mean, go for it.
It is sort of interesting. It makes blocking really hard. It means that, like, basically, if a creature survives combat, Desert's like, no, it didn't.
Yeah, if you survive by 1, then there's always that Desert that's like, all right, I'm sitting here waiting for you.
Yeah. You can get sniped by a Desert. There was the Desert Precon, so I think there's going to be a lot more Deserts floating around.
Very true. Keep your eyes on those Deserts.
But this is an important step to know about and know how it works, because there are some cards that become even more flexible and even more powerful if you know that you can cast them before damage or even after damage in combat. So let's talk about this, because Desert says something weird. It says it deals damage to target attacking creature. Things have attacked, they've dealt damage. Why are they still attacking?
Yeah, technically, as far as Magic rules are concerned, creatures are attacking all the way from the beginning of when they are declared as attackers, all the way until the very end of combat step. The whole time, even if they've already dealt the damage.
Still attacking.
Yeah, still technically attacking.
Which is very, very strange when it comes to certain removal spells become strange. Like, let's talk about Aetherize. Okay, so Aetherize is an instant for 3 and a blue. It says return all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. Normally, Aetherize is cast when you're getting attacked, and you're like, oh, I'm being attacked for lethal. I'm going to cast Aetherize, bounce all the creatures attacking to their owner's hand.
Yeah, but it is a very common... It's reasonably common for you to say, all right, well, that person is getting alpha striked. I have no way to deal with their board, but I kind of do want that other person dead. So say opponent A attacks opponent B, swings out for lethal. You want opponent B dead. Great. All right, taken care of for you. But otherwise, you can't deal with opponent A's board, except you have this Aetherize. So what do? Well, if you deploy the Aetherize during the end of combat step, you can still bounce their entire board back to their hand, even though opponent B has already died. Crazy.
You're still in combat, and they're still considered attacking. It makes this more of a modal spell. Obviously, that's a very narrow situation, but if you know how to use Aetherize, you're using it a whole turn in advance. Normally, you would have to, like, if you didn't know that, you would have to hold up the mana for Aetherize for a full another turn until they attack you, and then you cast it there. Meanwhile, you know, they are preparing to kill you in another big splashy way. So knowing when you can use it makes this spell so much more efficient. And there's a lot of cards that are kind of like this. Like even Condemn, it says put target attacking creature on the bottom of its owner's library. Its controller gains life equal to its toughness.
You just don't see this card much anymore once the Tuck rule went away, but...
But it's still a 1 mana Tuck spell that you can cast on a creature at instant speed. Most of the time, it's going to be a creature attacking you. That's going to be how you're going to use it. But sometimes you do want that Blightsteel Colossus to kill your opponent before you tuck it.
And then you just get rid of the Blightsteel. Perfect.
Gone.
Ooh, love that. Unless you do that against me, in which case I'll be very sad. Another very common way to use this strange end of combat step is something like Reconnaissance. If you're a fan of like older game nights, you saw, I believe it was Wedge.
A lot of Reconnaissance.
Used Reconnaissance, where you would attack with everything, and then during the end of combat step, you could activate Reconnaissance to untap them. So it was like pseudo-vigilance, but Reconnaissance is even better because you can just send whatever into combat, they'll block however, and you can just be like, all right, fine, this one, I'll pull you out of combat, I'll pull you out of combat, everything else deals damage, and then I'll finally, once they've dealt damage, pull them out of combat, and they basically have vigilance.
So
very
powerful in any aggressive deck.
Yeah, it's 1 white mana too. Crazy.
One I was thinking about recently is Galadrim Ambush. This is a card from Lord of the Rings. So this is a fog type effect. It's 3 and a green for an instant that says, create X 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens, where X is the number of attacking creatures. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by non-elf creatures. So the obvious thing for this card is put it in an elf deck.
Seems like a good idea. I would do that.
Fog, fog all the creatures that aren't elves and protect all of your elves in combat. Get some more elves.
Cool, like that.
But I do like this card in token decks, and they not necessarily elf token decks, because you can cast it post-combat after you've attacked with like 10, 15 1/1s, and you want them to deal damage. You can cast this post-combat, make 1/1 elves for all of the surviving tokens.
That is neat. That's super neat.
It's pretty cool. And obviously you can use it on your opponent's turn, and there's lots of ways to use Galadrim Ambush, but it becomes a lot more flexible if you know when is the right place to cast these kinds of spells to give yourself the most benefit, for your 4 mana fogs.
Yeah, and that's also something that you can keep in mind with something, say, that has first strike or double strike. You can fog in between those individual combat damage steps. Say you want one of the things to go through, and that's enough to kill one person that you want dead, but if you let both of them go through, then you'll be dead. So just do it in between, and problem solves. It just makes, once you have this information, it makes everything you do and all your combat tricks so much more versatile.
It's very interesting. I guess something we didn't hit quite hard enough, but when you create that second damage step between first strike and regular damage, there is a second moment of priority that goes around, because there's 2 different steps. So it's like, okay, go to damage 1, priority, go to damage 2, priority goes around. So that's where you could cast a fog in between those steps. One more thing I want to talk about is Mandate of Peace, because this is a bizarre card if you know how combat works. It's 1 and a white for an instant, and it says cast the spell only during combat. Your opponents can't cast spells this turn. And then it says end the combat phase.
Yeah, so this one is really funky because you can use it at any time during the combat phase, which makes it very, very flexible once again. You can do it basically whenever attacks happen, whenever blocks happen, whenever first strike happens.
I've seen this card used to keep myriad tokens.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, because at the end of combat step, the trigger goes on the stack that it's like, okay, we're all done with combat. Are we ready to exile these myriad tokens?
Yeah.
And you can end the turn there, and it's basically like a 1-turn Sundial of the Infinite.
Yeah, you keep like your Geist of St. Trapped Angel same way. That's cool.
You can counter all of those end of combat stuff. Or you could, fog the turn and stop it and cut off your opponent's second main phase. But it's really changes depending on when you use it and what you're trying to do with it. So this card looks very narrow, but if you understand how the steps work, it becomes even more powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I wanted to mention before we move on is Maze of Ith. Because Maze of Ith, I think, gets treated a lot like Reconnaissance, where it's it removes the creature all the way out of combat. That's actually not the case.
It doesn't. Yeah, if you read the card, it says, untap target attacking creature, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by that creature this turn. So it prevents things, but doesn't actually pull it out of combat like Reconnaissance does.
So you could sort of use Maze of Ith in a weird way with First Strike. You could use Maze of Ith with after First Strike damage is dealt, you could use Maze of Ith to pull to prevent the crackback.
So funky.
Damage. It's very, very strange. And it doesn't do exactly what people say it does when they're like, I'll make it so that's not attacking anymore. No, it just sort of untaps it and fogs the damage on it. That's why you can use Maze of Ith with creatures that untap 2 lands, and you can make infinite mana in your combat steps. You could use it at any of those. Like if you have a creature that taps to untap 2 lands, you could use Maze of Ith to untap it, and then tap the creature to untap your Maze of Ith in one of your lands. And then you can tap it again and untap all of those lands, make either infinite mana or do infinite activations on one of your other lands. There's a lot of different ways that you can use this. Of course, you only have the mana in that step, but that's the reason why Maze of Ith works that way and Reconnaissance doesn't, because Reconnaissance says it's no longer attacking, and Maze of Ith just says it's untapped and doesn't have any of the consequences of being an attacker.
Yeah, and because it's preventing damage, if you ever have something that says damage can't be prevented this turn, then Maze of Ith doesn't really do anything. It untaps it, but...
Yeah, that's very interesting. The idea of using a stomp or using a questing beast to get around a Maze of Ith is very relevant.
I've had that happen to me.
Like, if you don't know that that's how Maze of Ith works, then you miss that damage is still dealt.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that...
Just one more thing.
One more thing. Ninjutsu.
Yeah, Ninjutsu is really, really cool because during the end of combat step, you can still ninjutsu things. Because it's an unblocked attacker. Well, assuming it's unblocked. If it's still an unblocked attacker, then you can ninjutsu it right back to your hands. So
after it's dealt damage.
After it's dealt damage already. So you can get that trigger, and then you can get it right back to your hand, like chain ninjas together, so that you can keep the important ninjutsu thing in your hand, so it doesn't die to removal, so that you can ninjutsu it again next turn and get whatever cool triggers you might want or need for the next turn after that.
I've seen this most commonly with like very powerful ninjas like Fallen Shinobi, and then evasive ninjas like a Thousand-Faced Shadow or something. Because it's not very easy to connect with a Fallen Shinobi, which is just a 5/4 on the ground. But it is but it is very easy to deal damage or to have an unblocked attacker with a Thousand-Faced Shadow, which has flying. So if you can keep kind of sneaking it in, that's a very good way to do it without spending that mana multiple times.
Hot, spicy tech for your ninja decks.
Yeah.
Here at the command zone.
Ugh, ninja decks are so hard to play. There's so many lines.
Hard. But they're so fun, too. They're so rewarding to play. I love it.
So we've gone through what combat looks like, and we've broken it all down, and it's so much more complicated than just attack blocks damage. We're going to get into a lot of the things that happen in combat. We're going to talk about how keywords work together. We're even going to talk about the most dreaded keyword of all time. Banding. Of course, we're going to do all that after a few words from our sponsors.
Welcome, one and all, to Honest Rutstein's Wild West Shopatoria. We've got keychains, novelty hot sauce, reanimated skeletons, you name it, we've got it. Yes, sir. Ever since I was relocated to Thunder Junction, business has been booming. But it's not just the change of scenery. I also got Shopify, the global commerce platform that helped me grow my business every step of the way. Back in Innistrad, I had to hawk my tiny skulls out of my creepy trench coat all by myself. But that was the old Rutstein. Now, Shopify makes everything so much easier. Shopify lets me sell my wares everywhere, from their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system. Plus, they got great customer service and the internet's best converting checkout, helping you turn Windows shoppers into window buyers. If you sell Windows, which I do. Now, thanks to Shopify, people don't call me Old Rutstein the Grave Robber. They call me Honest Rutstein Entrepreneur. Though I do still rob graves. My man's gotta have a hobby.
Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/TCZ, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/TCZ now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/TCZ.
Ooh-wee! The desert can be a harsh and unforgiving mistress. Toiling under the cruel heat of the blazing sun does a number on a fella. Even me, Yuma, proud protector. On sweltering days like this, nothing satisfies more than a cool, delicious sip of water mixed with liquid IV. One stick of liquid IV plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. And compared to the leading sports drinks, it has thrice the electrolytes that plant folk and people crave. Liquid IV can't be beat when you've had a hard night of chasing tumbleweeds, gaming with friends, or traveling the plains. They even got a whole posse of tasty flavors, sugar-free and otherwise. My buddy Prickly Pear here's a big fan of the pear flavor. Me, I'm a lemonade man. Because I always say, when life gives you lemon powder, just tear it open, pour it into your canteen, and make lemonade-flavored water. I say that literally all the time.
Turn your ordinary water into extraordinary hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code COMMAND at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code COMMAND at liquidiv.com. Tear, pour, live more. And then I'm going to flash out Illusory Ambusher. I will bolt it to draw 3 cards. I will sneak attack out Triskaidekaphile. I'm going to go to my upkeep and I will win the game.
That was your first time playing the deck?
Yeah, well, I mean, first time in paper. I've already goldfished it like 100 times on ARCHIDEKT. Their playtester is super user-friendly. Playing cards just takes 1 click, and you can mulligan, tutor, and move through your turns with the press of a key. There are simple menus with counters and copies, and you can take notes on cards as you play them.
ARCHIDEKT is the best place to browse, brew, and playtest commander decks. Just go to archidekt.com/commandzone to get started.
That's ARCHIDEKT.com/commandzone.
Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about combat, and we're going to get into keywords.
Yeah.
Keywords are interesting. I feel like I didn't realize until recently that almost every keyword is explicitly written to break a rule of combat in the positive way, right? Vigilance says you don't have to tap. Trample says that damage goes over. Flying says that you skip the blocking part. Almost every...
First strike creates an extra combat.
Keyword creates a whole other
damage,
thing.
Yeah.
Why? But all of them are sort of designed to make combat go better for you. When things... some of them are very confusing, like First Strike and Double Strike have a lot of really nitty-gritty rules about them.
There's a lot of rules baggage.
But things get really complicated when those things start combining.
Yes.
So that's mostly what we're going to talk about today, but we're also going to break down some of the more popular ones, like lifelink.
Yeah, so lifelink is it says when a card with lifelink deals damage, the controller of that card also gains an amount of life equal to the amount of damage dealt. That happens simultaneously. That happens at the same time that damage is dealt. It is not a trigger, which is the most important thing to know about lifelink. So if... For example, you have a blocker that has lifelink, and then somebody is attacking you for lethal. But it wouldn't be lethal if you gained that life from the lifelink. Well, you're in luck, because that's how lifelink works. It all happens at the same time. You will be alive, because it is not a trigger. If it was templated as a trigger, you would not be alive, because the trigger would go on the stack, and then it would immediately just kind of dissolve,
like, wait, you're
because
dead.
State-based actions are checked, and the player is dead. Actually, fun fact, old Magic rules said that you would not die until you got to the end of the next. I believe it was, I don't remember if it was steps or phases.
At the beginning, weird.
Yeah, so...
It doesn't check if you... So you could just keep playing through the combat at 0 life.
Up until a certain point. Crazy, I know. Anyway...
So, I know we said that lifelink isn't a trigger. It used to be.
Yeah, so...
It sometimes is.
Before they templated lifelink as a keyword, there would be some cards like Spirit Link that says whenever this creature deals combat damage, or I believe it's damage.
Whenever enchanted creature deals damage, you gain that much life.
Yeah, so that is a trigger. That is how it used to be templated.
It says whenever, so that's how you know it's a trigger.
Yeah, so this can create a little bit of confusion with things like Loxodon Warhammer, where the original printing of Loxodon Warhammer prints it as a trigger, because lifelink hadn't been invented yet.
Yeah.
But more recent printings of Loxodon Warhammer say lifelink. And the way Magic works is you always go by whatever the most recent printing is. And so it has been functionally eroded to lifelink. Magic
changes how the card works.
Yeah.
It makes it considerably better.
Doesn't really do that much anymore. They've kind of looked at things like Loxodon Warhammer and been like, oh, well, if it was a trigger before, we probably just want to keep it a trigger, even though it might function better with lifelink. We're just going to try to keep it functionally the same. But it is very important for you to look at old cards, say, hey, what is the most up-to-date rules text of this? And am I following that as exact as I can? Because it might just save your life or lose your life, depending on
what side of the Loxodon Warhammer you're on. We're going to talk more about lifelink, but we'll get to that after we talk about Double Strike.
Yeah, Double Strike.
We've talked about First Strike. Creatures with Double Strike hit twice. They hit once when First Strike damage would be dealt, and again when regular damage is dealt. It may seem straightforward, but combat damage triggers will trigger twice. You've dealt damage once, you'll deal damage again. That means it'll happen twice. You'll draw 2 cards off Toski, you'll deal twice that much damage.
Yeah, anything from like Felix 5 Boots decks or anything, if you give something Double Strike, then wow, you can have a trigger that gets doubled up on the first strike damage, and then you can have another trigger that gets doubled up on the second strike damage, and you can get a total of 4 triggers on a single attack. Pretty neat.
I found this out recently.
Yeah, this blew my mind. I'm like, why does this work?
This is bananas.
This is
because
crazy.
this was in the release notes for Thunder Junction. And I've also found it in the rules text for Blade Historian. So Blade Historian says attacking creatures you control have double strike. So if Blade Historian leaves the battlefield after first strike combat damage has been dealt, but before regular combat damage, perhaps because it attacked and was destroyed on the first strike combat damage or something like that, attacking creatures you control will lose double strike.
Makes sense so far. I'm with you, Rachel.
A creature without double strike won't deal regular combat damage if it has already dealt first strike damage this turn.
What? That's so crazy. You'd think that if it has double strike, it would deal the first strike damage.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I don't have double strike anymore. That's fine. I'll just do my regular combat damage. So why is it that when it just rolls it back? It's like, I've already done combat damage. It's fine.
It sees that it's already done combat damage already and is like, oh, well, I guess I'm done then.
This is one of those very strange rules that exist for a reason.
Yeah. So
I don't know exactly what the reason is, but there is some sort of interaction that somebody thought about that is like, it must work like this so that something doesn't break.
Yep.
If anybody in the comment section knows what it is,
let us know.
Let us know, because we certainly don't.
It was wild. And Blade Historian is the most straightforward example, but Bruce Charles Roving Rancher, which is the one that gives oxen double strike.
Yeah.
It's in the release notes for Bruce Charles. And I swear, Murph, I spent so long trying to think of a relevant example of why you would remove a Blade Historian after first strike had been done or something. That's
true. This is such a niche scenario that why in the world would it ever come into play? But unfortunately, Magic rules have to account for literally all possibilities.
I found some, though.
Okay.
There's one that they refer to already, is like if you block a Blade Historian with a creature that has first strike and it just incidentally dies. Okay. So if you have a 3/2 with first strike and it kills the Blade Historian, the second strike doesn't happen.
Okay. Yeah.
Great to know. If you're the attacker with the Blade Historian, don't send it at that player.
Just attack with everything else. It's fine. Leave the Blade Historian.
Leave the Blade Historian. He's a little guy. So that's a relevant example. But I could think of one where you would purposefully wait or like incidentally this would happen.
Okay.
And it's if you have a creature that has an enrage trigger that removes creatures.
Ooh.
So if you have an Apex Altasaur, for example, or maybe a Wrathful Red Dragon, that say when they're dealt damage, it says whenever a dragon you control is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any target that isn't a dragon. So if you have some damage dealt to the Wrathful Red Dragon and you send it at the Blade Historian, that second combat damage doesn't happen.
Yeah. That's neat.
And if you didn't know that that's how that worked,
we don't blame you.
We don't blame you
one bit.
But now that you do, now you know in that situation that you kill that thing and you're like, I don't even take the second strike because I read the release notes for Thunder Junction, I guess.
They're in the release notes. They're in the...
You listen to the Command Zone podcast.
Yeah.
Is the answer. So be careful, I guess, with your static double strike granters.
Definitely true.
One more important note about double strike is if the regular strike creature or the defending player dies on the first strike, there is no second strike. So if you have a 3/3 with double strike and it's blocked by a 2/2, the 2/2 dies immediately. There is no second strike. So that is relevant if you have like a double striker with lifelink.
Yeah. So that is something that I've run into many times where I'm expecting to gain a certain amount of life because I'm like calculating it all up. I'm like, all right, this does 4, this is 5, this is a 9. 16, no, so 16 times 2 is 32. All right, so I'm going to gain 32 life.
Yeah.
But then when damage is actually dealt, well, some things will die to the first strike damage, and then the second strike damage will not happen. And so you're not actually gaining that much life if, again, you have something with double strike and lifelink.
Yeah. So that math, it becomes so much harder.
Alpha strike combat damage math is just the most ridiculous thing.
If you do have something with double strike, lifelink, and trample, now you do get both strikes.
Trample.
Trample.
Its own thing.
We're going to talk about trample
We're gonna
later.
get there
It's so
soon.
confusing. So that's double strike and lifelink. Be careful with how much damage you gain or life you gain there. Next one is first strike and death touch.
Yeah, this one is
It's
actually
a classic.
This one's a classic. This one's kind of built into a couple cards like Glissa, which we already mentioned. Death touch just says that any amount of damage that needs to be dealt to something is enough to be lethal.
Yeah. Any amount
Exactly.
of damage is lethal.
Yeah, any amount of damage is lethal. That's a good way to put it. And so if you have first strike and death touch, well, then you can deal damage to it, and then it'll automatically die because it has death touch. And assuming the other creature, the blocking creature, also does not have first strike or double strike, it will never have that chance to be able to deal the damage back.
Too slow.
Much too slow.
That's why creatures like Glissa are so difficult to block, because even if you block with a 10-10
Or attack into, for that matter.
or attack into,
Yeah.
even if you attack with a 10-10, Glissa can just boop
And Glissa's still alive.
and survive that combat. It's a very powerful combination of keywords. I wanted to talk about first strike and infect because I do think this is a really neat interaction. So they work very, very well together, especially in combat. If you have a creature that has both first strike and infect, you'll deal the infect damage to a creature first, and that will be dealt in the form of -1/-1 counters. So if you
This
have
is
like
specifically infect, not the poison mechanic.
yeah. So if you have like a 2/2 with first strike and infect, and they block with a 3/3, that would normally kill a 2/2 with first strike. But if you have 2/2 first strike infect, you deal 2 damage to it. They drop to a 1/1, and then deal 1 damage back. Now your first strike infector survives that combat,
Yeah.
and the 3/3 dies.
Yeah, I love that. That's super neat.
All right, one more ninjutsu niche case. One more, because this is wild. With first strike and ninjutsu, you can have an unblocked creature with first strike, deal the first strike damage, and then ninjutsu it out, sneak in a ninja, and have the ninja there to deal regular damage.
So this, if they're two separate entities, it works, and you can do the first strike and then the regular damage because
Yeah.
like, oh, I haven't done damage yet. But
It's
if
a
it has
different creature.
it is a different
He
creature.
just got here, Murph.
He just got here, and he hasn't technically done damage. I get it, but intuitively, what the heck?
I think that's so wild.
Yeah.
So it effectively gives you both combat damage steps because you have two different creatures. That may make like ninja decks look a little harder at first strike creatures. I don't know. I don't know how much first strike there is in blue and black.
Yeah, not a ton.
But it's cool for all you Esper ninja decks.
Yeah. All right, we're moving on to one of the more complicated
Oh,
keywords.
trample.
Trample. It seems like it should be simple, right? You trample over damage.
It
So-
makes sense.
It makes sense intuitively, but when you get down to the rules, it makes a little bit less sense. So we're going to break it down for you all out there. So trample specifically says, when attacking, trample allows the creature to assign the remaining damage not taken by creatures blocking it to the defending player. So remaining damage, that refers to damage in excess of lethal damage. So we talked a little bit about lethal damage. That's just however much damage you need to do to the thing for it to die. So
Yep.
if it's death touch, then it's 1. So trample and death touch work very well together because you can assign 1 damage, that's enough to be lethal, and the rest of it is going to trample all the way over.
But most of the time, it's just you take the power and you subtract the blocker's toughness, and that much tramples over. Of course,
Of course.
things are always, so the attacker has to deal at least lethal damage to the creature. There may be some scenarios. We talked about assigning damage in the combat damage step of combat.
Yeah.
If you have a trample creature, you get to assign as much damage as you would like to that creature as long as it's at least lethal. So if you have a 6/6, you have a Colossal Dreadmaw, and they block with a 2/2, normally you would assign 2 damage to the 2/2 and 4 damage would trample over the player. But if you have something that cares about excess damage, or if for some reason you don't want to deal that much to the player, you only want to deal 3, I don't know. If like they have pariah or something, you could assign 3 damage to the creature and have 3 trample over, or 4 damage to the creature and only have 2 trample over. Trample gives you a lot of control over how much damage is actually dealt to the creature. And this is kind of relevant for like a stuffy doll. if they block your Colossal Dreadmaw with a Stuffy Doll, you could assign 1 damage to the Stuffy Doll and have the rest trample over, or you could assign all 6 damage to the Stuffy Doll and have that thrown at the other player. You have the power here.
Yeah, you can make a deal. Hey, what if I just assign as much damage as possible to the Stuffy Doll? You certainly can do that as long as it's enough to be lethal.
If a creature blocking a trample creature is removed, the creature is still considered to be blocked, of course, but all of the damage now tramples over because there's no amount of damage that is lethal damage.
Yep. So you swords a blocking creature, a creature that's blocking a creature with trample. All of a sudden, every single point of damage is now going to trample over. So it's like it wasn't blocked in the first place.
Yeah, because you assign damage after you have to take actions.
Yep.
Okay. The final confusing thing about trample before we start combining it
is
damage doublers. It's kind of. So damage is assigned before it is doubled. So in that situation, I have a Colossal Dreadmaw, you have a 2/2. But now I also have a gratuitous violence, which is just a damage doubler. Just
if damage would be dealt, it deals twice that much instead. It's replacement effects, yada yada.
You would think that I would only have to assign 1 damage to your creature because I know it's going to be doubled, and that's lethal now.
Yeah.
But the game doesn't see the damage doubling until the damage is dealt. So you still have to assign 2 damage to the 2/2, which is lethal damage. So what you would do in that case is I would assign 2 lethal damage to the creature because I have to.
That
and
turns
then
into 4.
4 tramples over to Murph. And then when that damage is actually applied, that's when it's doubled. So 4 damage is dealt to the creature, it dies, and 8 damage is dealt to Murph. Okay.
Super fun. All right. So we already talked a little bit about trample and death touch. But there's another thing that's kind of complicated and confusing about trample is what happens when you run into protection.
What happens if lethal damage isn't lethal?
Yeah. So protection, quick refresher, is this creature, if a creature has protection, it can't be dealt damage, enchanted, blocked, or targeted by any card it has protection from, regardless of who controls it. So that's your det, D-E-B-T. So it's kind of like Shroud in that regard.
Yeah,
Not quite, but...
You gotta be careful with like your pump spells or something. I've seen people get got by their own sort of this and that because it is protection from half their deck.
Yep.
Protection is protection from all of those colors.
Yeah, I've seen like colored equipments and stuff. The more that they do of that, the more I'm like, well, do I really want that with my Sword of Feast and Famine?
Yeah, it makes black equipment much more complicated. So
you can't put a Sword of Fire and Ice and an Embercleave on the same creature. It just can't happen. Sorry.
So with trample,
yes,
when you oppose it.
Yeah.
So if I have a Colossal Dreadmaw and you have a 2/2 with protection from green, what happens? Do I have to assign all of my damage to it because none of it's lethal? Or is none of it lethal, so all of it tramples over? That would be cool.
Yeah, so... That's the funky thing about protection. So with protection, you basically assign what would be lethal damage if it weren't protection, and then the rest tramples over, and then whatever damage would be applied to the thing with protection is then prevented.
Yeah, it's sort of like the damage doublers.
Yeah.
When you're assigning damage, lethal damage doesn't really consider that ability. So you would assign 2 and 4 tramples.
Yeah, it's just like how much would it take for it to die? Oh, wait, actually, it doesn't die.
Yeah.
Is more or less how it works.
So that makes some sense. When you start combining it with other keywords, it gets really confusing, though. So what if I have a 6/6 creature with trample and lifelink, and you have a 2/2 that has protection from that creature?
Yeah, so what ends up happening is you assign the 2 because that's what must be lethal, and then 4 damage tramples over. But because all the damage is prevented to the creature that has protection, you'll only end up gaining 4 life.
It's really strange.
Yeah.
So even though you're dealing 6 damage, 2 of it's prevented, so you deal 4, gain 4.
Yeah, that's not too bad. That's relatively intuitive compared to some other things on this.
Okay, so what if it has trample and double strike?
Okay, trample and double strike.
So I know this stuff sounds really, really like niche.
Yeah.
But this is just a 6/6 creature with an Embercleave on it.
Yeah.
Like
Commander gets way more complicated.
This happens all the time.
Yeah.
So if I have a black 6/6 with trample and double strike, and you have a 2/2 that has protection from black, I would assign the 2 to the creature, like we talked about, 4 would trample over. But now the second strike happens. How much do I have to assign to the creature to be lethal? It's still there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have any damage on it.
So what the game does is the game says, oh, well, this doesn't have any damage marked on it, so you must once again assign lethal damage before anything else will trample through. So if you have double strike and something with trample, you'll deal 4, and then you'll deal 4 again, because,
because the creature just never takes damage.
Yeah.
So you have to just assign what would be lethal damage, and then that will be prevented once again. Okay, what if it has trample, double strike, and death touch?
It's basically the same kind of principle where with Death Touch, you only need to assign 1 damage for it to be considered lethal damage. So you do that. You can still do that to this 2/2, and then 5 will trample over. But then the same thing happens again like before, where it says, oh, it's not dead. It doesn't have any damage marked on it. Let me assign lethal damage to it. Again, you'll deal another 5.
So 10 tramples over.
10 trample in total, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, all of that changes if that creature is instead indestructible.
Correction. Some of that changes.
Well, all of it changes. One is incidentally the same.
Yes. All of that changes, but some of the outcomes can be kind of similar. Anyway.
So indestructible is completely different from protection. Indestructible creatures still take the damage. Like the damage isn't prevented, but lethal damage isn't enough to destroy the creature.
Yeah, so the damage is still marked on it. It just does not die due to damage being marked on it as a state-based action. That's all indestructible does. Well, aside from also can't be destroyed by things that say destroy and all that jazz.
So the same thing happens. You have a 6/6, you have a 2/2 indestructible. I assign 2, which it would be lethal damage if it weren't indestructible, 4 tramples over. But now you add lifelink to that equation.
Yeah, so then it changes. It's now saying, well, 4 damage tramples over because, once again, you must assign lethal damage, but you still gain 6. Because you are dealing the damage, it's just not dying as a result of you dealing that damage.
Yeah. So you're still dealing 6 damage, so you're gaining 6 life this time instead of 4, which was the protection one. So now, if it has double strike and trample, this also changes.
Yeah.
So if I have a 6/6 double strike trample, and you have a 2/2 indestructible, I assign 2 to the creature. That would be lethal. 4 tramples over.
As per the usual.
When you go to your second strike, you look, this creature has lethal damage already assigned to it, which means you don't have to assign any additional damage. This time, 6 tramples over. So 10 damage tramples over as opposed to the 8 when that creature had protection.
So it works differently between indestructible and protection. So it is very important to know what one thing has versus the other when you're dealing with these keywords.
Okay, one more.
One more.
Now it has trample, double strike, and death touch. This is very strange. It is as expected. You only have to assign 1. That would be lethal damage.
Great.
To trample over. So you 5 tramples over. And then on the second strike, it sees there's a creature there with 1 damage marked on it. That's not lethal damage. So it has to assign a second point of damage this time. So 5 tramples over it the second time.
Yeah, this one's also kind of weird and bizarre and just kind of has to do with how death touch works.
Yeah, I mean, it's because like it doesn't remember that it was death touch damage that was assigned to it the first time, even though it was lethal at the time when you assigned 1.
Yeah.
When you look at the creature the second time, it was like, what? I only took 1.
Exactly.
So you have to reassign 1, even though you've technically already assigned lethal damage to that creature.
Yeah, it's just a quirk of how death touch ends up working with trample.
Really strange.
And indestructible. Anyway, so that's a lot of super heavy stuff, but might save your life.
Might save your life.
At some point.
It might just help you resolve a combat a little bit better. I mean, this kind of stuff comes up so much more in Commander than it does in any other things because our format loves to pile keywords onto individual creatures. And when you start mixing and matching, it's really important to know how each keyword works individually so that when they start glomming together, all of this stuff can sort of be pieced out.
Yeah. So next up, let's talk about a somewhat more recent mechanic. I guess not necessarily super recent, but more recent in its implementation.
Yeah.
Goad.
Yes, Goad. I forgot that Goad was in Conspiracy.
Yeah.
It's like pretty old. Goad.
Don't say Conspiracy is old.
It's pretty old.
I think was it Conspiracy 2, Take the Crown is when they started it?
Maybe. I'm not sure.
I think it was Conspiracy
I didn't play
2.
Magic then.
That was 2016. That was 8 years ago. Don't make me feel old, Rachel.
It's pretty old.
That's pretty old.
Pretty
so
old.
it's been around for quite a long time, at the very least 8 years.
And that whole 8 years, it has been a difficult to understand mechanic. I think in part it's because it has two requirements.
Yeah, the requirements are a goaded creature attacks each combat if able, and attacks a player other than the controller of whatever it is if able.
So that's two different requirements assigned to a single creature. First, you must attack each combat if able. Second, not me or other stuff. It has to be a player other than me. So that means that you can't attack a planeswalker, you can't attack a battle. You have to attack a player other than the goader.
Yeah, so the way that Goad functions is you must try to satisfy as many conditions as you possibly can with the goaded thing. So you try to attack each combat if able. If you can, you must do that if you can. And if it's, say, down to 1v1, well, the creature must attack, but it can't satisfy that second condition. That's fine. It'll satisfy whatever condition it can, which is it must attack.
Yeah. It's like if a modal spell, one of the targets fizzles. The rest will still try and do as much as it possibly can.
Yeah, and that's why Goad decks oftentimes have a hard time closing games out, is because they're like, well, I can goad things. All it does is make them attack me.
It's hard. Yeah, at the end of the game, it gets tricky. There are some interesting sort of corner cases about Goad. Goaded creatures remain goaded until the goader's next turn. So it's every single combat that they attack for until their next turn. So if the goader somehow skips their turn, like with a Chronotog or something, that creature will remain goaded.
Yeah.
Because their turn doesn't happen.
Eater of Days or whatever.
Yeah. It just, that creature is still angry and still can't attack that
How funny
player.
would that be to make a deck where you try to like skip your turn and that's the whole point of it? And so you just try to goad as much stuff as possible, cause as much chaos, and then do something where like you phase out with like Nefarious Protection and then skip all the turns you possibly can.
AD has that deck.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I must see this.
It's mono blue. It's the Siren.
This is like simultaneously the coolest thing and also probably the most miserable thing ever.
It's so funny. It's a really powerful deck. But yeah,
Is it actually?
It's a lot of mana, but it's like when it gets to that situation, there's not a whole lot you can do.
You have no idea how happy this makes me that this already
You have
exists.
to eliminate the other two players before you can start attacking AD. So it's wild.
That's fun.
But yeah, you can use Chronotog and stuff to skip your turn and just keep those things going. Obviously, you skip your turn. That's not great.
Yeah,
but
probably not the best thing to do.
If people are dying in the meantime, it's pretty cool. One more thing. Once a creature is goaded by a player, them goading that same creature multiple times does not add any additional requirements. Goad doesn't it doesn't like add a time. There it's like you're goaded for this turn and the next turn and the next. That's not how it works.
Yeah, it doesn't
goaded for one turn. It wears off on your untap. Okay, so that's all just the stuff about Goad. What happens when you start combining Goad with combat restrictions, specifically stuff like Ghostly Prison?
Yeah, this is one that we've both run into people saying, oh, well, if there's a Ghostly Prison on board, what you can do is if your creature is goaded, then you can attack into the Ghostly Prison player. But then the Ghostly Prison says, oh, actually not, you can't attack me because you have to pay 2. And so then you kind of
satisfied the Goad stipulations, but you can't because the Ghostly Prison said.
Yeah, we're gonna settle this once and for all.
That is not how it works.
You can't do that.
That is not how it works.
Stop trying to tell your play group that you could do that because you can't.
So you also can't force them to pay for a Ghostly Prison. So it says specifically in the Goad rules, it says if there's a cost to attack with a goaded creature, its controller doesn't have to pay that cost. And if they don't, the creature doesn't have to attack. But if there's an option to attack that doesn't have a cost associated with it, it still has to attack.
Yeah.
So if there's any option, it still wants to satisfy at least one of those stipulations that Goad put on it.
And it's got to be the can attack because the other one is kind of necessitates that you attack.
So let's say that it is a 3-player game.
Yeah, okay.
It's a 3-player game. There's the goader, there's the goaded, and then there's a player with a Ghostly Prison.
Okay.
So we're at the goaded player's attack. They go to attack, and they attack the Ghostly Prison player. Now Ghostly Prison says, hey, don't attack me unless you pay 2, and they don't pay 2. What happens there?
Well, you can't really do that. The game just rewinds to a point where it says, no, that's not good. You have to attack somebody.
Back up there.
Back up.
You had to attack.
So
it said so.
Then at that point, the only thing that you can do, unless you want to pay for the Ghostly Prison, obviously you can.
Yep.
But you have to attack because that's one of the conditions that it can satisfy. So then you just can't attack the person who ended up goading your creature.
Because you cannot satisfy that second clause, the don't attack the goader. You have to attack a player.
It's fine. I can do that at the very least.
It says fine.
I'll do it.
we'll get rid of that. Well, you don't have to do that one. But you still have to attack. So you can either attack the goader, or you could attack a battle or a planeswalker, because all of that is not relevant anymore. But you still do have to attack if there's one without a cost.
Yeah, that's another good point that I think we glanced by a little bit. You cannot say, oh, well, my creature is goaded. I don't want to attack into anybody. I'll just attack this planeswalker instead. You cannot do that.
Nope. It specifies that you have to attack a player other than the goader player.
Yep. And planeswalkers are not players.
If you're down to... It basically behaves as if that player isn't there. It looks at the Ghostly Prison and says, that says I can't attack them. And then
so that's that. I can't.
So I'm not gonna. I can't attack them.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna attack you because I can't do that. So it doesn't work that way.
Sorry.
If you're playing against Goad, if you're playing Goad, and there's a Ghostly Prison on the table, they could come at you, they could come at planeswalkers, that kind of stuff, but you are still forcing them to attack. I often see like Ghostly Prisons and Propagandas in the same deck as Goad decks, which is weird to me. It sort of makes all your Goad stuff worse and your prisons worse.
Yeah, it just doesn't really do anything.
So either dedicate all your slots to goading or dedicate your slots to prisons. They're not, I don't think they work very well together.
Yeah, good point.
So what happens if there's multiple goaders at the table?
Yeah, that starts getting a little bit more complicated as well. And with the rise of more and more cards that are printed that have goad on them or can goad things, this is something that starts to become a little bit more common.
Right.
Where you're like, oh, what's the biggest thing on the board? That thing, I'm going to goad it. And then goes to the next player and they're like, oh,
I'm going to go to 2.
I'm going to go to 2.
I go to 2. Great idea.
Yep.
So let's talk about this. If the game, let's say the game is down to 3 players once again. It's Goader A, Goader B, and the goaded who has a creature that's been goaded by 2 players. So now that creature, the goaded creature, has 4 requirements of it. It must attack, and it must attack a player other than A, and it must attack, and it must attack a player other than B. So 4 requirements of it. Now it has to try and satisfy as many of those requirements as it possibly can. The 2 must attacks are easy. We can handle those. But that means it either has to attack player A or it has to attack player B. It can make that choice. But it doesn't get the option of attacking a battle or a planeswalker. Because that doesn't meet 3 of the 4 qualifications. It only meets 2.
Yeah. Very strange. Oh, goad. Oh, boy.
It's so complicated. And we found so many strange use cases in that I just wanted to keep talking about it. So we because this is a new mechanic and people seem to really, really like it. It's a newly popularized mechanic.
Yeah. It's gotten a lot more support recently.
Yeah.
So now it's a lot more in the limelight.
I want to talk about goading static effects. Something like a mocking doppelganger. It's a clone that says other creatures with the same name as this creature are goaded. If a player plays that clone and clones like that creature, or say they name a token and they goad multiple tokens. If anybody else gains control of this mocking doppelganger copy, then it does shift the goad. It doesn't stay locked on that player because they created the initial effect for some reason.
Yeah, because that is a static effect, and so the static effect will just transfer to whatever the new controller is.
The new controller is now the king. All of the tokens can come at the player who played the mocking doppelganger.
Same with Baloth the Baritol, does exactly the same type of thing. It's a static ability of just things are goaded. If Baloth changes controllers, then things that aren't Baloth's controller are goaded.
This next one blew my mind.
Yeah, so remember how we said, oh, Ghostly Prison, it can never force you to pay for it in order to attack. Well,
unless there's some sort of rule.
Turns out.
So Loyal Pegasus and many other creatures have a stipulation that says Loyal Pegasus can't attack or block alone.
So what if you goad that?
If somebody goads a Loyal Pegasus that says, but I can't attack or block alone, so I don't have to attack, right? Because if I just don't attack with anything else, then it can't attack.
Yeah, and in Magic, can't pretty much always trumps can.
Well, Goad asks it to
Attack
fulfill
if able.
to fulfill as many of these things as possible. So if you have a creature that is able to attack and your Loyal Pegasus is goaded, you have to attack with both.
Yeah, because Loyal Pegasus cannot attack alone, but technically it can attack. It just must fulfill another requirement in order to do so.
Yeah.
So weird.
That Loyal Pegasus is so mad, it is bringing other creatures into battle with it. No, we're going!
Yeah. Now, keep in mind that that other creature is not necessarily goaded, so you can send that wherever you want, but it must also attack.
Yep. So you can't use an attacking limitation that you can meet as an excuse to not attack.
Yeah.
Unless that thing is a cost. And then that you can't make them pay costs.
Yeah.
And I think that's connected to the fact that you just can't force someone to produce mana.
Yeah. You can't
like the game doesn't allow you to force another player to tap their lands to add mana to their mana pool.
Yeah.
Which is probably an old rule actually associated with mana burn.
There are effects that do that say like target player like taps all their mana or draws all mana from their mana pool and stuff like that. But yeah, they don't really do that.
It's
My
very
brain's hurting.
And look, I know you look at Loyal Pegasus and you're like, yeah, but who plays that card? I do.
What do you play Loyal Pegasus in,
It's
Rachel?
in the pony deck.
It's in the pony deck.
It's a 1-mana 2/1 flyer.
That's
That's
a
like
good
actually
point.
really good.
Then you can attack with multiple ponies together. Friendship is magic or something.
It is. I wanted to talk about a slightly more relevant situation, like a card that more people play. And Port Razor is sort of the best example of like an attacking limitation that I could think of. There's a number of cards that sort of do this. But Port Razor is an Orc Pirate. It's 3 red. It says whenever Port Razor deals combat damage to a player, untap each creature you control. After this combat phase, there is an additional combat phase. And then it says Port Razor can't attack a player. It has already attacked this turn. So if you goad a Port Razor, there's 4 players in the game. You have the Port Razor, and I've goaded it. Now you have to attack with that Port Razor, and you have to attack, Josh or Jimmy. And then if that connects, you have to attack with it again, and you have to attack Jimmy,
other person.
whoever you didn't attack that time.
Okay, tracking so far.
And then if it hits that player, it still has to attack, and it can't attack those 2 players. So now it's coming at me who goaded it.
Yeah.
You just can't send it at me the first or second time because it can meet the qualifications for the first 2.
Yeah.
attempts.
Once again, it is trying to fulfill as many requirements as it can, and if it can only fulfill one because all its other options are exhausted, so be it. It'll take what it can get.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, I'm doing what I can.
Yeah.
And if you have a Port Razor that survives that whole time, that's pretty sweet. Good job.
One specific card we did want to call out is Carter Doomscourge.
Oh yeah, he's different.
He's different. Everyone says, oh, I'm going to play Carter and I'm going to goad all your stuff. Okay, well, Carter is not technically goad. It functions differently. So Carter says, until your next turn, when it enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able and attack a player other than you if able. So you're not goading things. You're not saying everything that's on the battlefield right now, I'm going to goad them. You're just saying...
Which there are cards that do that.
Yeah,
say,
like Disrupt Decorum.
Disrupt Decorum goads all creatures.
Yeah, so that'll only see anything that's on the battlefield. These are now all goaded. If you play a new creature that has haste, first main phase, for example,
not goaded.
That's not goaded. Whereas with Carter, it just says that until your next turn, this is an effect that is happening. And that effect is creatures have to attack. So if you play a creature with haste in your first main phase, now it must attack according to Carter's rules.
Yeah, if an opponent has a board of creatures and you cast a Disrupt Decorum and they play a Craterhoof, all of the creatures that were on the board before then can't attack you, but Craterhoof can.
Yeah.
If you play a Cardor none of those creatures can attack you, even though the Crater Hoof wasn't there when he came down.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why Carter is so powerful, and it also isn't a thing that can be removed. Like, once it happens...
Even if he leaves.
Even if he leaves, he enters the battlefield, his trigger happens that says, this is the thing that is going to take effect all the way until my next turn. Deal with it.
Yeah.
So
Doom Scourge indeed.
Yeah, very powerful, very hard to get around that ability. So if people are like blinking this, if people are somehow like killing it and bringing it back, reanimating it, it's a very, very tricky card to get around.
Yep. Is it time?
It's time. We've been putting it off for so long, but now we're going to talk about the one, the only banding.
Banding.
So banding.
All right.
Is the ability. Is that? Let me take a deep breath and prepare myself mentally.
Banding is a keyword that I was just like, you know what? I don't need to know that.
Yeah.
I don't need to know it, and I never learned it. And then I played against Damon's werewolf deck, and he had a 1/1 wolf with banding.
You're like, I don't...
And that little jerk is really hard to attack into.
Yeah.
And we're going to explain why.
So banding is famously just one of the most complicated mechanics in Magic. The reminder text, quote unquote, is very, very long. So we're going to break it down.
Yeah.
So banding, any creatures with banding and up to one without can attack in a band. Bands are blocked as a group. If any creatures with banding you control are blocking or being blocked by a creature, you divide that creature's combat damage, not its controller, among any of the creatures it's being blocked by or is blocking.
What?
So...
Okay. So,
TLDR, you're just taking like a couple creatures and you're banding them together. They're teaming up.
Usually little ones.
Little ones most of the time in order to do more damage, more or less. They're like combining their power. They're combining their toughness.
Yeah.
In order to get through, maybe?
I want to split this up into, let's just talk about what happens if you attack in a band first.
Yeah. So first of all, if you attack as a band, honestly, it's pretty bad.
It's not pretty bad.
It's not that great because if one thing has evasion and you band it with something that doesn't have evasion, well, as long as they can legally block one of them, they can legally block the whole band, which stinks.
Yeah,
it's
it
not
like
very
gets
good.
rid of one of White's best qualities, which is flying, right?
Yeah.
If there's one soldier in a band, he brings down the whole group.
Yeah. Now, granted, if you have a flying creature with banding and then another flying creature and you band those together, then the whole thing more or less has flying.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I was like, why? Why is that good? Why would you attack in a band? And it's mostly so you have like a more threatening creature in combat. So your opponent can't just pick off one of your little things. Like if you have a 1/1 with banding and a 2/2 and your opponent has a 3/3. Normally, if you have just a regular 1/1, it's not a very good attack. There are 3/3s holding back both your 1/1 and your 2/2. But because that 1/1 has banding, you could band them together and attack functionally as a 3/3.
But what really makes banding special is the fact that you can divvy up all the combat damage as you see fit.
Yep.
So back to our example of you attacking as a band with a 1/1 creature and a 2/2 creature. Say your opponent blocks with a 3/3. Normally, all of these creatures would trade regardless of how you've ordered the blockers. However, because of banding, you can choose to have the 3/3 deal all of its damage to only the 1/1.
Yeah.
Or the 2/2 if you want, whatever is most
2/2.
advantageous to you. So suddenly, it is now no longer you are trading that 2-for-1, it is a 1-for-1, and they have the bigger creature.
And they kill your worst creature rather than your better creature.
They
which
kill
is
whatever
usually.
creature you want them to, or you would rather have them do.
Yeah. Now, that being said, I don't know if banding is all that useful in Commander when it comes to attacking. Like, it'll help you get a little bit of chip damage in here and there, but I don't know if I'd really dedicate a whole slot in trying to make something a better attacker with banding. I'd just use unblockable or flying or something like that. So I don't see banding as an aggressive keyword coming into play that often.
Yeah. Now, the funky thing about banding, like we said, is that it functions a little bit different from attacking and blocking. Because
it's much better.
Because when it comes to blocking, well, you can already double block, triple block, quadruple block, however many things you want.
They don't have to be in a band.
They don't have to be in a band. So what is the benefit that you get of blocking with something that has banding? Well,
remember how we said earlier that the attacker assigns the order of blockers for combat? If you block with the creature with banding, suddenly you, the defender, gets to assign order of blockers for combat. Plus, you get the previous benefit of being able to split up the damage however you want.
So let's say this situation is flipped. Your opponent has a 3/3, you have a 1/1, and a 1/1 with banding and a 2/2.
Yeah.
Now, it's a little bit awkward to attack into with their 3/3 because you attack with a 3/3, they block with the 1/1 with banding and the 2/2 in a band, and your 2 creatures deal damage to theirs. And then you can choose to take all 3 damage dealt by that 3/3 and deal it to the 1/1 with banding. Or if you have a 2/2 creature with banding and a 3/3, for example, they can attack into you. You can assign 1 damage to your 2/2 with banding and 2 damage to your 3/3. Now neither of your creatures die and the 3/3 does.
Tough stuff for your opponent. So it makes you very, very difficult to attack into, even if it's, like you said, just a little 1/1 with banding.
Yeah, I mean, this is the situation that was so frustrating about this 1/1 banding creature is you know that, like, even if you're going to make a trade, you're trading for this 1/1
with
banding.
That's so bad.
That's terrible. It might as well have had Death Touch. It was so bad to attack into that we were like, we can't get past this wolf. Why? And it's very interesting because like that banding ability applies even if the creature isn't in a band. If you get attacked with like a 4/4 with trample and you block with a 1/1 with banding, you can assign all 4 damage to that banding creature and none of it will trample over.
Yeah.
They could attack with a Blightsteel Colossus.
And that banding creature is going under the bus for all that infect damage.
You take no infect damage and you lose a banding creature. You could even band with another creature, have all the infect damage dealt to the other creature, and keep your banding creature for next attack.
Yeah, that's why I like cards like Helm of Chatsuk, I think it is. It's a 1-mana artifact, 1, and tap it, and target creature you control gains banding until end of turn. So you can just throw that on whatever creature you want, whatever you think is going to benefit you the most.
Give that token banding. It can soak up a lot of damage.
And really, all you have to do is like keep that 1 mana open, because all you have to do is threaten it, and then people are like, assuming they know how banding works, which you definitely will after watching this episode, they'll look at that and think, oh, well, I don't think I can make very profitable attacks into you if you activate that helm, so I'm not going to do so. And so then you're not actually spending any mana. You're not even technically giving your creatures banding. You're just doing the threat of it.
It's really bizarre. I mean, you can turn this 1/1 with banding into such a defensive threat. Like if you're in just mono white, or let's say you're in like white and blue and your creatures are very small, you don't have a lot of ways to threaten to have a rattlesnake. You know, you don't have Death Touch. You don't really have very big creatures.
Most of the time you're just in chump block mode.
Yeah.
In those kinds of decks.
Banding means you are a super chump, basically.
Banding Super Chump is going to be the name of my next fantasy football team name.
And you know what's funny is like I was thinking about this. I was like, yeah, but who's ever going to need this?
Yeah.
I'm playing Mesa Pegasus in my pony deck.
Which has banding.
I need to know how this works. I need to know how the Loyal Pegasus works, just in case, so I can play my pony deck optimally.
So now, hopefully, if you ever run into Rachel and you say, hey, Rachel, I really want to play your pony deck. I think it's super neat. It's super cool.
There's a lot of weird rule stuff.
You will be prepared, at least for Mesa Pegasus.
Well, yeah, I think the conclusion on banding is maybe look at some banding creatures as blockers.
Yeah,
I mean,
try to leave it more on defense.
It's really cool with Death Touchers because you can like have your 1/1 banding and a 1/1 like Death Touch snake or something, and you can deal the Death Touch damage and kill the thing and keep your Death Toucher, just trade it for the banding creature. So annoying.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to attack into those 2 1/1s. I guess they probably don't attack into you if you have a 1/1 Death Touch anyway.
It's just the threat of it, so that really keeps people away.
And again,
if you don't know
annoying.
how banding works, people are going to be like, I don't want to attack into that.
I don't know. Something bad is going to happen. There's a reason that has banding. All right. Those are the rules that we're going to cover in this episode. We've talked a lot about combat and all of the intricacies of combat. To the listeners, What is the most complicated combat that you've ever had to resolve in a Commander game? And how did you solve it? Did you walk through all the steps piece by piece, or was it all just a mess and everybody scooped to it? I think the most recent one that we did required, like, I had to spend an overrun to buff Eric's board because only his board had trample to kill Jimmy because Jimmy was the problem. But Jimmy had pump effects on board.
Oh, wow.
And it was because we knew all of the steps and all the ways to walk through it. It made everything a whole lot more simple, as opposed to when things needed to get activated to give everybody the optimal shot at winning that combat.
Yeah. You can literally go through things literally step by step.
Yeah. Not phase by phase.
Not phase by phase. And that will just clean up your combat steps. Combat phases. So good at this, Rachel. We are professionals. So much better.
If you want to pick up any creatures with banding, go over to cardkingdom.com/command. They've got a huge selection of Magic cards, even some of the weird old ones. If you need to pick up a Mesa Pegasus or even a Loyal Pegasus to build the most confusing pony deck that you've ever built. Card Kingdom has a huge selection of ponies and other cards, I guess, for when you're building your next deck, or when you're building a cube, or you're bolstering your collection, or even just picking up some of the cool new cards over at Thunder Junction. You can always trust Card Kingdom to have a ton of those cards in one location. They're going to put it in one safe package, and it'll be shipped right to your doorstep. No need to chase a bunch of envelopes through the mail and check your history and be like, did I order that or did I not?
I always hate forgetting to add my commander, and then I'm like, I got my whole deck. I forgot my commander.
No! It's so much easier when you can just get a ton of the cards in one place, and then as soon as it arrives, you can sleeve up your deck and start playing. Plus, you can support the show without spending any extra over on cardkingdom.com/command.
Yep. And you can use Ultra Pro products. I don't think they have anything with art on it that has banding creatures on it, because those are all very old and they haven't used banding since 5th edition. But if you want to get some...
Maybe a Goad commander.
Yeah, a Goad commander, something with trample maybe. Tons of cool art. They got the license with Wizards. They've done it for like the past 15, 20 years, something like that, to be able to produce the coolest playmats, coolest sleeves, whatever it is that has all that awesome art on it. UltraPro.com/command is the best place to go to find those things on sale. You can go to your LGS whenever you're buying from there, or from UltraPro.com/command. You are supporting the show and protecting your cards at the same time and making everything in your play area look awesome.
Yeah, UltraPro.com/command. We usually do something cool outside the world of Magic, but I think we're going to take a moment to do something cool inside the world of Magic.
Yeah, we're cheating a little bit. We just like Magic.
It's
a Magic podcast. Let's talk about Magic a little bit longer.
Look, we've been playing a game at the office. It's brand new on the Commander's Herald website, and it's a game called Spellify. Spellify is basically like Hangman if it was like a million blanks and the blanks were a Magic card.
Yeah, it's like Hangman / Wordle-ish. Yeah.
It's
not exactly.
So you get a card and it's got a ton of blanks. It tells you what the card type is. It usually tells you what color it is.
Yeah, it'll have like the correct color of the border and everything.
Yeah, and then it'll give you like a certain number of blanks in where the name is and the power and toughness and all of that. And then you just guess letters until you know what card it is. And it's a ton of fun. If you have a deep knowledge of Magic cards, then it's like a real brain teaser.
Yeah.
If you don't, they're more accessible cards. There's certainly Commander cards. There's stuff that if you play Commander regularly, you have a shot of knowing. So it's not like, you have to guess Mesa Pegasus and know that it has flying and
But
banding.
if there ever is Mesa Pegasus, you'll know what it is.
Then you're going to know. You're going to know.
Yeah, there was one yesterday that I got stumped on. Today's I did real good at. I got it in 6.
Pretty good.
So
pretty
I'm
good.
pretty proud of that one.
If you're crazy like me, you can stare at the blanks until you know what card it is and just guess words and count blanks.
I don't care enough about my score to...
Zeros every day, baby.
Just
I'm great at Spellify.
R puts it in, thinks about it for a half second. Puts it in thinks about it forever. It's like once I start getting like halfway through, then I'll start like being like, all right, I should have enough information that I can like start to piece together some of the words and figure this all out.
I'm counting the number of blanks in whenever.
So you're like, that's definitely whenever.
That's whenever.
I haven't put in any single one of the
Enters
letters.
the battlefield? No. Whenever. A creature? No. A permanent? Permanent. Yeah, it's a ton of fun. We've been playing over at the office. Check it out if you're as into Magic cards as we are. Before we go, we got to say a big thank you to our amazing team here at the Command Zone. Thank you to Damon Lentz, Eric Lemp, Megan Yip, Gaurav Galati, Jordan Pritchin, Jamie Block, Arthur Metacroft, Manson Lung, Jake Boss, Sam Waldo, Evan Limburger, Katie Cole, Mitch Trafford, Josh Lee Kwai, Jimmy Wong, and of course to our resident rules expert, Josh Murphy, for talking about banding with me.
And lots of other complicated rules interactions. I always love these rules episodes. They're tons of fun. Let us know if you enjoyed it down in the comments below. Or if you hated it and you're like, why is Magic Rules the way that it is? I don't know. I didn't make them. We're just trying to figure them out.
We're doing our best.
We're doing our best.
We're doing our best. We had a funny interaction in this episode where we were talking about all the different keywords and how complicated they were. And Murph goes, we should include banding. And I was like, well, you'll notice if you scroll down, I've done a lot of research about banding.
Yep.
We hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for your attention. For further inquiries, send an email to commandcast@rocketjump.com or ask us on Twitter @JFWong and @JoshLeeQuai. See you later, alligator.
Greetings, humans.